1900, a sponge diver pulled something out of the ocean near the Greek island of Antikythera. It looked like a rock. When it dried, gears fell out of it. 2,000-year-old gears, precision gears, gears that a Swiss watchmaker in 1900 could not have replicated with the tools available to him. That device could predict the position of every planet in the solar system, calculate solar eclipses 223 months in advance, and track 4 separate astronomical cycles simultaneously. It was doing things that scientists in 1900 believed were impossible before the Renaissance. We have no idea who built it, we have no idea how, and it is not the strangest thing on this list. 6 ancient machines, 6 objects that should not exist, and 1 question that gets harder to answer the closer you look. Did we build these alone? Let us start with the device that broke everything we thought we knew. The Antikythera Mechanism was pulled from a 2,000-year-old Roman shipwreck in 1901. For 50 years nobody understood what it was. It sat in a museum in Athens, corroded and broken into fragments, and experts assumed it was some kind of navigational instrument. Then, in 1951, a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price got access to it and spent 20 years studying it. What he published in 1974 stunned the scientific world. The device contained at least 37 interlocking bronze gears. Some of those gears had teeth so small and so precisely cut that modern researchers using X-ray tomography, the same technology used to scan human bodies in hospitals, needed months to map them all. The gear ratios encoded into the mechanism are mathematically exact, not approximately correct, exact. The ratio used to calculate the lunar cycle is accurate to within 1 part in 40,000. To put that in context, the most precise mechanical clock built in Europe before the year 1600 was not as accurate as this device that was already sitting at the bottom of the ocean when Julius Caesar was alive. The mechanism tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year pattern where lunar and solar calendars realign. It tracked the Saros cycle, used to predict eclipses, which requires understanding that the moon's orbit is elliptical and that its speed varies depending on where it is in that ellipse. It tracked the Callippic cycle, which is a refinement of the Metonic cycle, so precise that ancient astronomers needed centuries of continuous observation to calculate it. And it did all of this simultaneously with a single input. You turned a hand crank. Everything else moved automatically. Here is the problem. We have a complete record of Greek technology from this period. We have their tools, we have their workshops, we have thousands of objects they manufactured. Nothing in that record comes even remotely close to the mechanical sophistication of this device. It is as if someone reached forward in time, took a mechanism from the 17th century, brought it back 2,000 years, and put it on a ship. When researchers from University College London built a working replica in 2021 using only materials and techniques available in ancient Greece, it took a team of specialists 2 years. They succeeded, which means it was theoretically possible. But possible and explainable are 2 different things. We can now say a Greek craftsman could have built this with enough knowledge. What we cannot say is where that knowledge came from, why it disappeared completely after this single example, and why nothing approaching this level of mechanical complexity appeared again anywhere in the world for the next 1400 years. The Antikythera Mechanism is not a mystery because it exists. It is a mystery because it exists alone. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was working in the basement of the National Museum in Baghdad when he found a clay jar about the size of a coffee thermos. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder. Inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod. The rod and the cylinder were separated by an asphalt seal at the top. König recognized immediately what he was looking at. It was a galvanic cell, a battery. The jar was 2,000 years old. It predated Alessandro Volta, the man we credit with inventing the battery, by 18 centuries. When modern researchers built replicas and filled them with an acidic liquid, grape juice, lemon juice, or vinegar, all of which were available in ancient Mesopotamia, the devices generated between 1.5 and 2 volts of electricity, consistently, reliably, for hours. The immediate objection is always the same. What would ancient people use electricity for? They had no light bulbs, no motors, no circuits, and this is where the story gets more interesting than the battery itself. In the same region, archaeologists have found ancient silver and gold objects coated with metal plating so thin and so uniform that for years experts assumed the objects were solid. When they were tested, the plating was micrometers thick. That is the kind of plating you get from electrochemical deposition, from running electrical current through a metal salt solution, from a battery. There is a temple in Egypt at Dendera with wall carvings that engineers in the early 20th century noted looked remarkably like a Crookes tube, an early form of electric light. There are ancient Indian texts describing something called the Agastya Samhita that contains what reads like instructions for constructing an electrochemical cell, specifying an earthen pot, copper plate, copper sulfate, and zinc amalgam. None of this proves ancient people had functional electrical technology. What it proves is that the Baghdad Battery was not an isolated accident. Something in the ancient world was producing and using low-level electrical current, and we built an entire history of technology that had no room for it. So we filed it under mystery and moved on. The battery is in a museum in Iraq, or it was. Its current location is uncertain after the events of 2003. We may have lost the physical evidence before we fully understood what it was telling us. There is a pillar standing in the courtyard of the Qutb Minar complex in Delhi. It is 7 meters tall. It weighs 6 tons. It is made of iron. It has been standing in the open air, exposed to the monsoon rains of northern India, for 1600 years, and it has almost no rust. This is not supposed to be possible. Iron rusts. That is not a tendency or a probability. It is a chemical inevitability. Iron exposed to oxygen and moisture oxidizes. A modern iron pillar of this size standing outdoors in a tropical climate would be severely degraded within decades and structurally compromised within a century. The Delhi pillar has been standing for 1600 years, and metallurgists who have analyzed it describe its surface condition as remarkable. When scientists from the Indian Institute of Technology analyzed the pillar in 2002, they found the answer, and it raised more questions than it resolved. The pillar is protected by a thin layer of a compound called misoite, a form of iron hydrogen phosphate. This layer formed naturally from the iron itself reacting with the atmosphere. But here is the problem. Misoite only forms under very specific conditions, and its formation was accelerated by the fact that the iron in the pillar has an unusually high phosphorus content, around 0.15%, and an unusually low slag content. Modern steel manufacturers add phosphorus to improve corrosion resistance. It is a known technique. The craftsmen who built this pillar in approximately 400 CE were doing the same thing, either by design or by working with iron ore that happened to have the right composition, and they were doing it through a process of repeated forge welding at high temperature that required a level of metallurgical control we did not think existed in the ancient world. The pillar was made by welding together approximately 20 to 30 individual iron blooms, each weighing around 20 kilograms, into a single seamless column. The welds are invisible to the naked eye. Modern metallurgical analysis can detect them, but only barely. The temperature required to forge weld iron this cleanly, sustained across a column this large, requires either a furnace technology we have not found evidence of, or a process so refined and so practiced that it represents a tradition of ironworking that was far more advanced than anything else we have from this period. We know who commissioned the pillar. It was a king named Chandragupta II. We do not know who built it or how they knew what they knew, The tradition that produced it left no other examples of comparable quality. 1600 years later, metallurgists are still studying it to understand techniques they want to apply to modern materials. Across Northern Europe, in museums in France, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium and England, there are more than 100 identical objects. They are bronze. They are roughly the size of a tennis ball. They have 12 flat pentagonal faces. Each face has a circular hole, and the holes on each dodecahedron vary in diameter from face to face. Each corner has a small bronze sphere. They date from the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. They are found exclusively in the northern provinces of the Roman Empire, and nobody knows what they were for. This is not false modesty or academic caution. The Romans were meticulous record keepers. They wrote about their tools, their instruments, their games, their rituals. The dodecahedra appear in 0 written records. Not one Roman text mentions them, not one. They are found in contexts that range from military sites to private homes to what appear to be ritual deposits. They show wear patterns consistent with heavy use. They were clearly important enough to keep and use regularly. And the Roman civilization that produced them left us not one word of explanation. The theories are numerous: surveying instruments, candle holders, devices for sizing military equipment, astronomical instruments for determining the optimal planting dates for winter grain, magical objects, toys. Each theory has evidence for it and evidence against it, and none has achieved consensus. What makes the dodecahedra strange in the context of this list is not that their purpose is unknown, it is the manufacturing precision. The pentagonal faces of each dodecahedron are geometrically exact. The angles are correct to within fractions of a degree. Making a regular dodecahedron in bronze using ancient casting techniques requires an understanding of three-dimensional geometry, a master mold of exceptional precision, and a casting process with almost no tolerance for error. If the geometry is wrong even slightly, the object does not close properly, the faces do not align, and the whole thing fails. Over 100 of these objects were made across a region spanning hundreds of kilometers over at least 2 centuries, and they are all geometrically identical. That is not craft, that is standardized manufacturing, that is quality control, applied to an object whose purpose nobody wrote down. Whatever these were for, they were important enough to manufacture with extraordinary precision and distribute across an empire, and they were so obvious and so familiar to the people who used them that no one ever felt the need to explain them. The mystery is not in the object, it is in the silence around it. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt, in a chamber that was sealed for centuries, there are stone carvings on the wall that in 1857 stopped an electrical engineer named Reinhard Habeck cold when he first saw photographs of them. The carvings show what appears to be a large bulb shape. Inside the bulb shape is a serpent in a posture that, if you're an electrical engineer, looks immediately like a glowing filament. The bulb shape sits on what appears to be an insulating column. There are figures that appear to be supporting or operating the device. Habeck and several colleagues who studied the carvings argued that they were depicting an ancient electrical light source, possibly a Crookes tube or a similar discharge lamp, and that the Egyptians had functional electrical lighting in the temple at Dendera. The mainstream archaeological response was and remained skeptical. The carvings are religious in nature. The serpent is a known Egyptian deity. The lotus flower at the base is a standard religious symbol. The shapes that look like electrical components to an engineer are shapes that look like entirely normal religious imagery to an Egyptologist. But here is where it gets complicated. The inner chambers of Egyptian temples and tombs contain extraordinarily detailed paintings and carvings in spaces that no torch or oil lamp could have illuminated without leaving smoke residue on the ceilings. Researchers have looked for that residue. They have not found it. The ceilings of some of the most elaborately decorated ancient Egyptian spaces are clean. This does not prove electric lighting. Polished metal mirrors used to redirect sunlight can illuminate interior spaces with surprising effectiveness, and this is the explanation most archaeologists accept. But the mirror explanation requires a chain of reflections through narrow passageways that engineering analysis suggests would not have produced enough light to work by, let alone to paint the kind of fine detail found in these spaces. The Dendera carvings may be religious imagery that happens to resemble electrical equipment, or they may be something else. What is certain is that the Egyptians accomplished detailed, artistic work in spaces that we still cannot fully explain how they lit, and that one chamber of one temple contains images that electrical engineers in the 19th century looked at and immediately recognized as something familiar. In 1898, during an excavation of a tomb at Saqqara in Egypt, archaeologists found a small wooden object among thousands of artifacts. It was labelled, catalogued and placed in a box. The box went into storage in the Cairo Museum. It sat there for 71 years. In 1969, a physician and archaeologist named Khalil Messiha was sorting through old artifacts in the museum's storage when he found the box and opened it. He almost dropped what was inside. The object was a small wooden figure, roughly 14 centimeters long. It had a streamlined body. It had wings, and unlike every other bird figure from ancient Egypt, it had a vertical tail fin. Every bird in nature has a horizontal tail. Airplanes have vertical tails. The vertical tail fin is not a decorative choice or an artistic simplification. It is a functional aerodynamic feature that stabilizes an aircraft in the yaw axis, preventing it from spinning. Without it, a fixed-wing aircraft cannot fly in a straight line. Messiha recognized it immediately as a model of a flying craft and said so publicly. The reaction from the archaeological establishment was dismissive. It was a toy, a decorative object, a stylized bird. So in 1979, Messiha and a group of aviation engineers and model makers built an exact replica of the Saqqara Bird in balsa wood, added a small rudder to the tail in keeping with the design logic of the original, and flew it. It glided stably with a lift-to-drag ratio comparable to modern glider designs. The original object, the one from the tomb, cannot be flown as is. It is too heavy for its wing area, and it is missing whatever was originally fixed to the tail section. There is a small socket at the rear of the body that clearly held something that is now gone. The dating is solid. The object is approximately 2,200 years old. The wood is authentic. The provenance is documented. The question is simple. Why does a decorative bird from 200 BCE have an aerodynamically functional vertical tail fin, a swept wing profile that generates lift, and a fuselage cross-section that matches the design logic of a modern glider? The answer that satisfies most archaeologists is coincidence. Natural selection produces aerodynamic shapes in birds, and an artist carving a bird might produce an aerodynamically functional shape without understanding why. This is reasonable. It is also unprovable, and it does not explain the vertical tail. The Saqqara Bird sits in the Cairo Museum. It is not displayed prominently. Most visitors walk past it without knowing what it is. 6 objects, 6 machines that should not exist inside the history we were taught. The comfortable answer is coincidence 6 times, independent discovery, artistic accident, lost context. And maybe that is true. Science is built on skepticism, and skepticism is right to be skeptical. But here is the thing that keeps serious researchers returning to these objects again and again. It is not that any one of them proves something impossible. It is the pattern. In every case, the technology appears once, fully formed, with no developmental record leading up to it, and then disappears. The Antikythera Mechanism has no predecessors and no successors. The Delhi pillar metallurgy appears fully realized in a single object, with no evidence of the learning process that should have produced it. The Baghdad Battery shows up in a region that has no other electrical artifacts and leaves no tradition behind it. Technologies do not usually appear fully formed and then vanish. They develop, they spread, they improve, they leave evidence of their own evolution. These did not. Either there are chapters of human history we have not found yet, traditions of knowledge that existed and were lost so completely that we cannot detect them, or there is a different kind of explanation that the evidence is pointing toward and that we are not yet ready to seriously consider. The past is not finished telling us what happened, and the machines it left behind are still waiting for us to understand what they mean. If this made you think, subscribe, because the next discovery on this channel is going to be harder to explain than anything on this list.